day, Dawns ARKS! Welcome everyone to your weekly Phantasy Star Online 2 podcast recorded live on October 25th, 2020. I'm one of your hosts, PrinceBrightstar, and with me today is not Xance, but rather, for this special episode, we have two special guests. First is someone who I consider to be my counterpart, someone who I've trusted for a long time to be able to bounce ideas off of. EarningKey, go ahead and say hello.
Hi, my name's EarningKey, and don't let Brightstar gas me up too much. I'm no one special.
Gotcha. And we also have here Arawen, whom, if you were watching back on YouTube, you might remember when they took us through a tour of Phantasy Star Online in VR chat. They have also been a good source for lore in the past, so go ahead and say hello.
Hey, I'm Arawen. I'm a Phantasy Star lore aficionado, and I occasionally hop in on Brightstar's streams and talk about lore in the chat.
Indeed. So the structure for this is going to be a little bit different than normal. Just to clarify, Xance has decided to abstain from being a part of this since he has not completed episode 6. But basically for today, we're going to be spending around 10 to 15 minutes first summarizing the first 5 chapters of episode 6, and then we'll jump into a summary of the final chapter, including deeper analysis of what's in play there. We'll touch briefly on the epilogue and what points caught our eyes, and then lastly today we'll then launch into a discussion on the future of the series. And hello there, Hakai. Good to see you here today. So let's go ahead and start into that summary here, starting with Chapter 0. And yes, there was a Chapter 0 for Episode 6 here. So, Chapter 0, the episode opens on a meeting with a who's who of the Arks. In attendance are Xiao, representatives from each groups of the Arks, and Lisa, including her Genesis weapon, Harriet. Harriet introduces herself to the whole group here. The topic is Shiva and how to counterattack her attack on the Arks at the end of Episode 5. Shortly after the meeting, Xiao retreats to the mothership when he detects it is under attack. During the invasion, a game is played between Shiva and her 2 party members, Varuna, Lashik, and Mitra. Luther also chimes in, saying how he was a photoner, and he was the one that created Harriet, and how she was used for bait for the profound darkness back then. Do any of you have any further comments on this here?
One thing to note is that her being used as bait is the biggest driving motivation for Shiva at this point, even though at this point anyone who's alive that wants to destroy the universe is pretty much insane, if they're not a darker.
Definitely agree with you there. Alright, and Ryopichu, hello to you as well. Alright, let's move on to Chapter 1 here then. So, the player and Matoi make their way over to the mothership, and it has been invaded as well by a new enemy type. Those are called Lumen Mechs. During the battle, the party encounters Mitra for the first time, and she describes herself as the goddess of imitation, having the ability to change into any form. The player, Matoi, and Lisa move on ahead, while Zeno holds Mitra's attention. Approaching the core of the mothership, where Shiva is found, Sarah appears, and reminds the player that, as well as informs Shiva that she does not have the ability to use photons at all. And as such, is able to put up somewhat of a good fight against Shiva. During these events, Xiao falls, and Ulk appears and uses Code Abyss to force everyone to evacuate, abandoning the mothership. Any comments from you two?
I guess the most important part is it's not necessarily clear if the mothership actually moves at this point. We'll have a series of emergency quests coming up in, well, I guess for those of you tuning in from NA. But for the 2 emergency quests, the first one being in actuality and the second one in VR that we just had recently come up, our assault technically takes place from Andusia to the mothership in that line as we try to break our way through their blockade.
Indeed, and I'm gonna be bringing that up as well here in just a moment, actually. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 2 then. Following Xiao's final words, the Arks make their way to Amaduskia. However, as EarningKey mentioned just a moment ago, they encounter the Demise fleet led by Shiva. This leads to that first emergency quest of the episode. During this emergency quest, depending upon what is chosen, one of two storylines plays out, as it's implied that the actions of one multi-party group will end up helping another multi-party group. Although you can't have two different quests running at the same time here. That's just a design flaw of the system, I guess, as we could potentially put it. In one storyline, you end up taking out several capital ships, as well as a final Lumen mech in the AIS Vega, which is the new version of the AIS created by Ludmilla, the new high cast of the episode. In the other storyline, your group attacks the lead ship of the fleet, eventually destroying the giant rotating Lumen mech within. Eventually, the Arks make their way to Amaduskia and meet with Korilla and Rokamitz, and several revelations are made. And I'm going to skip the video a little here to get that up here. Amaduskia was created by the Photoners by smashing two Xion clones together. And one of those clones essentially died in the effort, or as it's put in the game, they fell into a deep sleep and have not awoken since essentially becoming just a vessel. We then followed what I'm calling the cutest little Korilla down to the corrupted area of the world, and upon arriving where Kashina was supposed to be located, Varuna attacks. Sarah gets herself into the core, and after a brief moment of, oh no, Xiao emerges with his new look. After beating back Varuna, Xiao announces it's time to counterattack Shiva. Any further comment from you two?
It's actually interesting to note that during Varuna's boss fight, he does use Blade Destruction, which is a twin saber photon art from Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity, and possibly from 2, I don't remember. Even though he's using a sword, when Shiva is fought as a boss, she ends up using a version of that attack with her dual blades, so it is a weird homage.
True, and I think that also, in part, led to the creation of the Idola class as well.
I also have something. When the two Xion clones combined to make Planet Amdusha, the one that went to sleep, apparently it had created a corrupted area that was making Dragonkin in the area go crazy, which kind of makes me think that it might be an early signs of a profound darkness, and that one of the attempts soon after that actually ended up becoming the profound darkness.
It's possible. Yeah.
Beyond that,
go ahead.
Beyond that, the fact that Xiao merged with it brings up questions of what might happen to Xiao in future installments if he does show up in New Genesis.
That is a really good point, definitely. We do know, at least from the conversation that they had there, the corrupted area had sort of always been there. It wasn't created by the profound darkness later on, due to the player and Matoi's actions, as it were.
It actually ends up being a soft retcon of the original Ultimate Quest in Amadussia, since Anga had no part in creating those caverns.
Correct. Yes, that's definitely an important point to pick up on there. Definitely. All right, let's move on to Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 is actually split into two parts. Soon after returning to the bridge, Xiao works on a plan to counterattack Shiva's forces. During this, Lumen mechs begin attacking the Ark ship, and the player and Matoi sortie to take them out. The battle ends with a fight against a Rafaga Ringada. However, during all this, Mitra also managed to stow away during the battle and took on the guise of the player character. she is eventually forced off the ship. Following this, we see that Shiva's group reacting to the fact that their movements were predicted, and it was Maria that figured out what was going on. And there was even a brief moment of curiousness when Mitra took on Maria's form and forced Regius to try to pick. But I think eventually Xiao kind of helped him out with a marker as to who was who. Any comments on Chapter 3 so far?
One of the weirdest parts of this chapter is seeing Darkers and Lumimex working together for the first time outside of free fields where they could just randomly spawn and not kill each other because they're focusing on you. This opens up to what eventually will become the climax of the episode, since something weird is at play if someone that isn't directly affiliated with a Darker is controlling them. And it also brings up the mystery of what is ultrification, why are those enemies different from their base variants, and why are they pawns when they're so strong in it of themselves.
Right, and that actually does bring up that we also haven't talked about the ultra hard areas yet. And basically, through the early part of the episode, the different areas that had been exploration areas, except for areas on Earth and Omega, had ultra hard areas created due to Shiva's influence and ultrazation, and basically everything became more violent there, and even the music had changed quite significantly in some cases. I remember how the in the floating seabed area, or rather the floating facility on Wopal, there's quite more of a techno beat in there than there used to be.
And just for the nitty-gritty aspect of it, for those of you aware of Phantasy Star Universe, photon infection is a fairly common trope in the series, in which when you amass enough photons of a certain type, creatures start getting characteristics of that photon. In this case, this is a trademark of neutral photon infection, in which whatever the boss in the area is exposed to it, they become more of themselves and they get more emphasized traits. So in this case, the darker variants now have added attacks. They can use different versions of Majid and different negaphoton arts that we wouldn't see in even the extra hard version of the quests. And the only weird one out there is Gal Griffin, which ends up getting a weakness to ice because of Harkatan's red moon.
Yeah, and everything related to Ultra Hard is actually a big throwback as well to Phantasy Star Online, the original, whereby in Episode 1, basically the whole area had been transformed and a lot of enemies had been replaced with new forms of enemies. So we do see that in some of the bosses that pop up. Let's move on to the second part of Chapter 3 here now. So the second part of the chapter takes us to Harkatan, a place we haven't seen since Episode 3. Shiva has led the Luminex to the planet, and after saving what citizens she could, Tsunehime enacts a plan to seal away Shiva's power. The plan in place, Shiva falls for the bait, and a part of her power is sealed as we do battle with her. In the end, however, it's revealed that it was actually Mitra we were fighting. She dies, and Shiva attacks everyone there. We throw everything we have at her, including the Dark Falls powers, and even turning into Persona. The Ashen Maiden even reveals that she herself is a part of Magatsu and attacks, but nothing stops her. Suddenly, Shiva's attention is taken away by the appearance of Phaleg Ives. Shiva retreats after that encounter, and the Space Magatsu event starts after that. Any other comment from you two?
No, that one's fairly straightforward, although I don't have an explanation for where we are in this in-between world where she's whisked off all of her citizens to safety.
I think she said it was, like, in the area between the two areas.
There's not enough for me to denote it as subspace as of yet, so I got nothing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on to Chapter 4. So, Shiva attacks Earth, and we arrive to help Rina and Itsuki and Aika. Following that, we help Hitsugi and Kori. The Mother Cluster also jumps in and basically shows that they can handle things. Honestly, it didn't feel like they needed this at all in this chapter. And any comment from you two?
Yeah, they didn't need us at all. It's probably just to remind us that Hitsugi exists and that she's one of the 3 important heroines of the series as we know it. Or at least in the Phantasy Star 2 proper game.
Yeah, Phantasy Star Online too.
Right.
Let's see.
Why was Shiva attacking her?
It seems kind of random. I guess she was just attacking.
Was she mad because Fallag attacked her and she was getting revenge?
That would seem to be like the only possible explanation for this, because it's like, for one, she had to figure out how to cross dimensions to even get there in the first place.
She did watch Persona do it right in front of her, so it shouldn't be that hard for her.
That's true.
And for those of you who don't know, she's watching the entire Dark Falls Persona emergency quest from her throne.
Yep. Yeah, that's a cutscene that's revealed back in at the end of episode 5. All right, let's move on to chapter 5 then. So we arrive on Omega with Harriet and Lisa and Sierra. The mission here is to seal away a portion of Shiva's power from the Omega side by creating a barrier. However, Lumimex are already attacking Omega, and we meet up with Margareta. The party then heads for the Spirit Vein, which is where her power can be sealed at. Varuna, however, is waiting for them, and after a brief exchange with Margareta, bewildered by Varuna's betrayal, a battle ensues, and he eventually starts to attack the vein itself. Varuna is taken down, and in explaining himself, he says he serves Shiva even if she won't shed tears upon his death. He does say he was thankful for meeting Harriet while on Omega. Varuna seemingly dies at this point, and I do want to stop real quick here because this is kind of a really important point here, because his actions here, the fact that he's Varuna Lashik from the original Phantasy Star series on Algol, even during the end of the Millennium when Lashik shows up there, he makes mention that he needs to serve. In the English version, he says him, but at the same time, I don't think Shiva had actually been defined as being female at the time, that early in the series. So I think we can give a pass on that. But it's interesting to potentially show this connection between Varuna of PSO2 to Varuna of Algol, or Lashik of Algol, as it were. At this point, Harriet then creates a 6-sided shape, and I'm going to try to skip us ahead here to that. Yeah, here we go. So she creates a 6-sided shape, which is then used to seal Shiva's power away. Harriet then remains on Omega, and Margareta by her side, so they can keep the barrier in place. And in the final moments back on the mothership, Shiva gives a glimpse of what the final enemy's form is. So any comment from you two?
For those of you who've played other Phantasy Star games, the seal that is just playing now is reminiscent of pretty much every other seal you've seen in almost every other Phantasy Star game. In this context, each of the 6 focal points of the seal represent one of the different planets that we visited over the course of the first 3 or 4 episodes. I don't remember if Earth is among the focal points, but essentially it's using the power of photons to use the different planets as tethers to seal her power by essentially just grounding it to the seal with unimaginable force.
It's possible Earth may have been in there since the black hole also showed up near Earth as well. Alright, so that is pretty much the summary of episode 6 up until we hit the final chapter. Anything either of you want to bring up before we head into the final chapter now?
No, I don't think there's much to say. Let's get to the good part.
Okay. Alright, then let's jump into chapter 6 here, the final chapter of Phantasy Star Online 2. So, in the lead up to the battle, Xiao makes one thing very clear. Every ARKS' goal is to get Matoi and the player to Shiva, and we are not to be distracted in rescuing other ARKS. Xiao is also aware we would never accept an idea like that. And so the mission begins, and Matoi, Sierra, and Xiao reflect on how the place has changed, which we can see now here on the screen. Lumimex block the path, but Patty and T help with some of the fighting after the initial group. Soon after, areas fill with security fences that activate, and from there the player needs to navigate through these. Aki and Light also appear around this time. And this leads to the first cutscene, and I'm going to try to bring that up here. Here we go. The first cutscene where we're going to meet up with Regius, and he reconfirms our mission, but also tells us to do as we like. After another round of combat through the security fences, we then reach near the core, and Regius says he's going to stay behind, so we aren't interrupted. During that time, as we approach the core, a Grav Executor, which is the big boss that was introduced during the Divide quest, is the last obstacle in our way before reaching the core of the mothership where Shiva lies. Upon reaching there, Shiva greets the player, Matoi, and before commencing battle, they show how the rest of the ARKS are doing at that time. And if anything, I want to say that's a little Palpatine-ish, if I might say. From Star Wars. So during all this, Zeno and Kashra are helping with external combat. Kashra makes a comment about how his wife would hate him if he went down. Maria and Huey are fighting elsewhere, and Maria's weapon starts acting up again. She makes a comment about Zig slacking off again. However, they're still able to hold their own, all to keep everything off the player and Matoi. And Regius attacks some Lumimex, and I want to get this up here if I can. Let's see here. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. So, at this point, Regius has broken his Securio sword in the attack, but he is still holding strong. It's at this point that Shiva begins her attack for defeating Mitra and Veruna. And once again, Shiva calls us the vessel. After that attack, Shiva then calls us the vessel of the world once again and makes an offer to have the player and Matoi join Shiva. The idea, however, is rejected, and Persona speaks along with us. Let me stop there. Do either of you have any further comment at this point?
Yeah, we should give a little bit of context during one of her monologues. I think it was right after Veruna got defeated. Okay. Essentially, she goes off on a tangent how she's always alone and she'll end this alone. And right behind her is a very, very ominous shadow of what will end up being the True Profound Darkness's final form, or the second form of the newest emergency quest featuring it. What's important to note is we don't know how much she succumbed to that thing at this point in time. The Shiva that we knew at the end of episode 5 and the start of episode 6 may not even be the same entity that we're fighting at this point in time. It's very unclear as to how much of it has influenced her, because she's talking about concepts that she physically should not know about at this point in time.
The fact that she's mentioning wanting to end it alone is also relevant to how the bad ending goes.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys get to the end of that episode before we bring that up, though.
Okay. Sounds good. Alright, so from there, the battle scene once again shifts back to the other group again. So I'll bring that up here. Yeah, here we go. So Regius has finally completed breaking their weapon. He accepts defeat, but also calls out to Alma one more time. Suddenly his World Ender sword appears, and through this he can hear Alma. And he basically, Alma then places her photons inside the World Ender, and Regius is back on the attack again. Huey and Maria are still holding strong, but they get a bit of help from the Dragonkin Corilla, as well as Claris Clays III and Sarah. Kashra and Zeno appear at the end of their ropes, but then several more arcs, including Kuna, Echo, Afin, and Eucritia, appear to help. And then we have a scene with Xiao and Sierra and Tamahime appearing and indicating that they've done all they can, and it's up to Tsunehime now. At that point, then we return... let's see. Let me get the right scene up here. Yeah, here we go. So at that point, it appears that Matoy and the player have been stabbed. However, this is just an illusion created by Tsunehime. Tsunehime explains that Alma and Xiao had created an ashen ring to encircle the area that Shiva paid no attention to. This allowed the teleportation to happen and allows Xiao's final plan to go into effect, providing the player and Matoy with all the Ark's power through the use of the Ashen Cloud, as well as the Dragonkin crystals as well that are in the air. All efforts combined, Shiva is finally defeated. However, Shiva also states that history is repeating. With Shiva defeated, the Primordial Darkness needs to find a new host, and finds it in the player. And thinking quickly, the player intends to warp the Primordial Darkness back to the beginning of time. In doing this, the player is going to hear Shion's voice, once again, telling them that their answer is correct. They inform them that there is a great light within them, and in doing this, they will themselves become the new Akashic Record. And the credits roll from there. So let's kind of stop there for a moment here. Do either of you have a comment here? And in fact, Arawen, I think you said you wanted to pick up on something now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Profound Darkness, after it merges with the main character, which I'm just going to use the name Ash, the Profound Darkness has merged with Ash, and Ash has used his time travel ability to take the Profound Darkness to the beginning of the universe. There at the beginning of the universe, it loses its, it has no photons to consume, and it loses its hunger for consuming photons. And then from within the player, a new great light is born, which births the Akashic Record in the universe itself. And that's why I mentioned that the relevance of Shiva saying that she wants to end everything alone. And that to me was the Profound Darkness speaking through her, because the goal of the Profound Darkness is to erase the existing universe and start a new one, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So, to give a little bit of context to the motivations of the Profound Darkness, which this ending actually contradicts to a certain degree, I'll just be summarizing one of the points that was brought up in Phantasy Star 4, I believe. But essentially, when the universe was created, there was a single light, and it's split in two. One is the Great Light that is referenced in various games, and the other is the first Profound Darkness, which, in context, is named Idola. The two fought, and Idola was eventually sealed in the Genesis seal that became the Algol star system. And when that seal weakened every 1,000 years or so, the most malicious part of its hatred for all of existence, because it had to sit there and watch the world go on without it, would be born in the form of Dark Falls, and this would keep happening as destruction kept ramping up with more and more falls being born over the endless span of time, until eventually it was able to be set free at one point during that game and defeated by Chaz Ashley and his party. Every Dark Falls and every Profound Darkness fragment, I would say, just for the point of differentiating between the different Profound Darkness entities that we've seen, all have that same motivation. Whether they're connected or not is up to every individual's perception of whether or not the games are connected or not, but they all want the erasure of the world, presumably to do what its sister entity did and create a world based off of itself. And although we didn't explicitly state that, this is the bad ending of PSO2. You die, the toy's heartbroken, the world is saved, and the world technically goes on, but without you. And from the player perspective, that's where the story ends.
Yep. And something else to note here, well, a couple of things I want to note here. This scene that we're looking at right here, the way that the screen is moving from right to left, in every other time we've seen this, it's actually been moving the other direction. So this is actually portraying how we're now heading back in time, compared to every other time where we were sort of moving forward into the next episode, as it were.
Yep. And that darkness at the end of that credits is the blackness of whenever the Oracle universe didn't exist.
Yep. And the other thing is Go ahead.
Oh, also, since you mentioned the way the credits are moving, when you in the raid version of the Profound Darkness, when he's defeated, you move past the planets in the opposite direction, like you're going back to the future.
Yep, that's a good point to call out there. I don't have that queued up, but that is a really good point to make. There's also another implication of well, really a question of how many times has this actually happened here? Because Shion has always been about figuring out how to make time line up in such a way that everything ends up perfectly. And I'll get a little bit more into this when we actually get to talking about New Genesis later here. But the question is, how many loops has the Primordial Darkness gone through? And also, the other question is, it's obvious that Shiva knew some information here, but we don't know just how much she actually knew. We know that she was not the one going through these loops, because if you happen to remember EarningKey a few days ago, I mentioned as I was going through this content again, back in Chapter 3, that Shiva was completely unaware that we ourselves were going to turn into Persona, that we ourselves were a Dark Falls. And I'm trying to remember what it was that you said about that.
The gist of it was, because she was taken aback that someone who is the shining pillar of arts that we are, someone that's so exceptional with our proficiency in manipulating and performing photon arts in general, would be succumb to something as pitiful as a Dark Falls, and a really, really poor excuse of a Dark Falls when it comes to Persona. And that's just objectively speaking. I love Persona to death, but from the perspective of a Falls, it is incomplete and was never to the same scale as the other Falls. Because she was because we were able to be taken over by Persona, even though we trust Persona intrinsically, she started looking into herself and realized that what she harbors inside of her will consume her at one point in time. Now, whether or not this revelation is the trigger for the primordial darkness to start seeping into her and start whispering to her remains unknown, but we do know that after that point in time, she does start talking to it, and she does start going mad at that point.
Indeed. Alright, So, obviously that was the bad ending. Let's kind of move on to the good ending here. And when you get to this point here, if you've met certain conditions, you get a second option here. If only I could have seen our future.
Yep. We should also note that in addition to actually playing through episodes 3, 4, and 5, and actually being able to see those cutscenes for yourself, every ARKS operative in the mothership raid, or I should say, in the assault on the mothership, has to survive for this option to even pop up at all. And you have to S rank, of course. Which, based off of our earlier inquiry of how many times has this cycle gone through, it has to be countless for all of those little pieces to fit into each other. Since the odds of every single person making it out and all those events playing out is astronomically small.
If you want an anime reference for this, think Endless 8 from Suzumiya Haruhi. That's the best reference I can think of, where that group sort of went through, what was it, I think over 17,000 tries before they finally got out of that time loop.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder, though, if there was a timeline where Shiva won and then Shiva became the source of the new universe a few times.
It's possible. But we also have to consider how many times, also, that things never got to episode 6. How many times did episode 3 repeat back to episode 1?
Mm-hmm. But at that point, since Shion was at the driver's wheel for the majority of PSO2's story, it's presumed that once she figured out how to get us through episode 3 and past it, then it's a matter of how many times does the larger cycle repeat itself.
Yep. So as we saw there, after wishing to see the future, Shion agrees that the future must not lose us as well. Shion then shows us all the connections we have made during our journey and then fills us with them. Harriet then feels something is amiss, and Varuna appears alive, and he tells Harriet to look after the barrier while she finds us. Hitsugi also feels uneasy, and Aru appears as dark falls to help her find us. And then Matoi is crying about our loss, and then Shion appears and helps her to find us as well. Inside the player's mind, let's see, where is it? Yeah, we're basically inside our own mind, and at this point we start to hear a voice. And then, at that point, outside, we are plummeting into the past, and it's here that that Harriet, Hitsugi, and Matoi appear to fight back the primordial darkness, expressing their bonds are what led them here. And then, upon saving the player, we give our thanks, and Harriet expresses that the primordial darkness has lost both its destination and vessel, and become power incarnate. It needs to be defeated here and now, and all the photons, all of the energy of every living thing, is here to fight, here to help in the fight. And it is here that the battle against primordial darkness, Gomorrah, begins. After striking at its limbs several times and hopping across platforms, avoiding waves of energy, as well as platforms that get destroyed, and even a certain familiar attack, it is defeated. And then moving down into a deeper layer of the area, upon reaching the primordial darkness, they have a new form. But something I do want to call out here, this whole area is reminiscent of what is called the Edge from Phantasy Star End of the Millennium. It's a very unique look, but if you were to look at both of them side by side, you would see it's very similar. in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's here at this point that the final battle begins against the new Primordial Darkness Sodam. In the background, music flares, and as the battle progresses, the two singers in this battle become prominent, ending with the song as a duet from its original version, where you just hear the female version. And then, moving ahead here a little bit. I think this is it. Yeah. So, to deliver the last strike, all the Dark Falls, as well as Harriet, Hitsugi, and Matoi, form a symbol that the player then becomes the core needle of to the attack, similar to what the Profound Darkness tried to do to Navarius. And in doing this, Primordial Darkness Sodam is defeated. Once it's defeated, Persona and the other Dark Falls appear to the player and Matoi, telling them that apparitions like them don't belong anymore. Shion appears one final time to say that her knowledge basically ends here. She has no idea of what lies beyond in the future. It's a future that even the all-knowing knows nothing of. And then Harriet, Hitsugi, Matoi, and the player awaken on Amaduskia. Matoi hugs the player, and after saying thank you, Matoi asks if what happened was a dream. The player answers appropriately, and they walk off, camera panning to the ship waiting in the sky. Roll credits. And if we look to these credits here, something that will become very prominent here is the fact that in all these scenes, there are no Darkers in any of them.
Mm-hmm. Even more strange is, I believe it's from when it pans from the tundra to the empty ruins, it hits right at the line of, and the wishes of every living thing will come true.
In the lyrics.
Yep.
Yep. And so that takes us to the end of PSO2's story. Anything else you two want to add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot to dig in there since, I guess people are interested in figuring out what the hell actually happened.
Pretty much, yeah.
So to start, the great tunnel that we're traveling in, when we make our split decision, once we make the selfish, and it is a selfish request, unfortunately, of we want to live to see the future with everyone that we've saved and forged bonds with, we are no longer in that tunnel. We're free-falling in what will eventually become the stage that the final fight takes place in. That area is a piece of subspace, or a space within a space, made of photons, which has become shaped by not only the primordial darkness inside us, but also the great light, which is reformed with the wishes of every creature that has ever lived and will live, and the Akashic Record itself. When what's the best way to phrase this? When we touch down and we're reintroduced to Persona and Shion, and they tell us that all light is converging to this point and we need to end the fight right here and now, that is the pinnacle of all events that will ever come and ever will come. And because of that, I suppose it's a little bit weird to phrase just because it's a very esoteric concept in itself, but essentially the purpose of the Akashic Record being to record all light, it can't record this one moment. And that's what makes this one area so special. And because it looks like the edge shows that any piece of subspace tainted by the darkness that great has a distinct look and feel to it, and it really resonates when, in the emergency quest version of this fight, the only light that we see in that pitch black place actually comes from the primordial darkness itself, from its eye and from the little growths on its arms. Now, I'm not the best person when it comes to these kinds of metaphors, but it is certainly something to take note of.
Definitely. Anything else to add here?
In my interpretation of the battle was that up until this point in the series, the Akashic Record was always part of the Profound Darkness itself, and that during this battle it was separated from the Profound Darkness, allowing the Great Light to exist as an independent being. And I've always thought of that as a parallel to the origin story from Phantasy Star 4, where the light and the darkness were separated from a more primordial being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tale basically goes that that used to be an energy-based being, and they started fighting amongst each other, and that was what created the two, the Great Light and the Profound Darkness. The Great Light wound up winning in the end, and sealed away the Profound Darkness then within what you've called the Genesis Seal in the past.
And that has no relation to NGS. That was a complete coincidence that they coined that term for the new game.
Yep.
And another interesting bit is everyone's favorite song from that emergency quest and from the story itself, Dark to Light. The three parts of the woman's stanzas are actually Matoi, Hitsugi, and Harriet's different events that took place and they parallel the events of episodes 1 to 3, 4, and 5 and 6, respectively. While the male lines are essentially our response and our bonds forming with them.
Yep.
Should we touch on the difference between the story version of the fight and the emergency quest version of the fight?
Yeah, let's do that real quick. Because the...
Yep.
The two in the story version there's two phases, the two that you've seen here, but in the emergency quest version there is a third phase that gets added to the fight. I'm curious actually what you think of sort of the gold fingers that they add into that phase.
It's a very weird concept, especially with the fact that something that's supposed to be the darkest creature in all of existence, exuding light, and pure light as of that, since we've seen it with Deus Ex, and we've seen it in certain other parts of the Phantasy Star series, but golden light in itself is usually allocated for something that's pure and something related to the Great Light itself. For it to be here is very unsettling, to say the least. When the three heroines intervene on our behalf, we have different effects that correspond to their various colors. So in Matoi's case, it's a purple effect, in Hitsugi's it's blue, or I'm sorry, red, and in Harriet's it's blue. So either because the weak points on its finger joints are weak points in and of themselves, it is likely that is either a metaphor for the hopes of all creatures wanting you to defeat this thing, so they're physically creating the weak points for you, or it's something that's just waiting for us to be discovered in a parallel from some Phantasy Star game that's yet to come.
Yeah, that's very possible. Especially since we know New Genesis takes place 1,000 years after these events happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is that during that particular fight in the Emergency Quest version, during those final moments, Harriet, Matoy, and Hitsugi can also provide some attacks that help you out. So one of them will stun Sodam here. Another will massively increase the amount of damage you're doing, and I think the last one just does a bunch of damage to him, I think.
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to go back to the second phase of the fight when he changes the field and the element.
Okay, yeah, since we're on that right now.
Topic. Okay. So an interesting part of Sodom's fight is it can actually change the overall elemental charge of the field and essentially create a crucible of a new universe in that field where that raw photon is permeating so much that the unbridled effect of whatever that element corresponding to it is taking place outside of your field of battle, that if you get knocked outside of it, you'll be dead in a couple of seconds unless you have a lot of defensive investment. This takes the form of electricity, water, ice, and fire. Though what's very strange is that water takes the color of purple, which is usually reserved for dark on the photon spectrum.
Yep, there's also a ground element in that as well, or I guess a Diga photon element, whereby in order to avoid that particular attack, you have to go into a tornado that's appeared. And Diga is something that we haven't seen since back in Phantasy Star Universe. At that, it's interesting that they brought that back in this final moment here, even though it's never actually been a part of the rest of the game.
It is very odd, and this is technically the first time in the core series where we've seen water as an element being used as well. Though both Earth or Dai photons or Daiga and its variations along with water are seen in Idola Phantasy Star Saga, it's very odd to see those two make a reappearance.
It may have actually been in the Alcohol series as well, because I remember Watt being one of the techniques that could be used there. Although I don't know if that was actually intended to be Barda. We'd have to double check the translation on that one.
I just want to mention that I actually found out where the corrupted version of the Primordial Darkness's theme is actually used.
Really?
It's in the upcoming content. This is something that data miners had found. It's the new solo Ultimate Quest uses the corrupted version of the theme.
Oh.
That would make sense. Yeah, because there's going to be a version whereby it's like the singers are no longer singing correctly, and then there's also a piano version I don't think we've heard either.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's mixed in a way that the singer's lines are cut off. It's like scrambled English, but the few lines you hear, occasionally you might think that the lyrics are just telling you to go away and die with the way they cut off the words in certain points.
Huh. That actually contrasts the literally only 2 words sung during the first stage of the Primordial Darkness fight. When the song loops, it actually says the words "free us and save us." So that is very interesting.
Yeah, they cut the words, and it uses the clips of the same lines from the main song. It's just cut short in ways where, if you listen to it the right way, it sounds like they're saying "go and die" over and over again.
That is definitely something to look into once it comes out.
Yep. The question is it going to be like that from the start, or are we going to see that, say, at around, once we hit like stage 100 or something in the fight? I
would hope so. The solo Ultimate Quest with Elga was probably one of the best written story elements in the entire game.
Yeah, with
Now, I don't know much about the upcoming Ultimate Quest. Is it going to be portrayed as VR, or is it going to be actually story intertwined?
it would have to
I'm
be
not-
VR at this point, unless they're actually adding like a second epilogue to all this.
We'll just have to wait and see.
Yep.
And I know that the raid version of the Profound Darkness was framed as you being other arcs, not the main character, standing by to deploy to attack Shiva's ship, and then all of a sudden the Profound Darkness warp appeared.
Yep, that would make sense. Yeah, and something else I want to point out about that third phase is, in that third phase, it's actually like a real battle of darkness versus light in there, because in those first few moments, you're going to get pushed back by the primordial darkness, and then you could potentially get pushed back even further if you're not doing enough damage at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
And if your team's not good enough, then you might get the entire field covered in that.
Yep. Yeah, that's not fun, and the only ones that can really live through that are those that have the damage balancer from a toil. So sometimes I've gone after that left hand with a sword, even though you really shouldn't be doing that with that one.
I actually, and I don't mean to brag in any way, shape, or form, do not do this, those of you watching at home. I can actually survive on the in the kill zone for at least 40 seconds just because of my disgusting amounts of HP.
Yeah, what are you at now? Last I saw you were at like 3,700.
4K. 4.1, I think.
that's
Once I
before a
finish my
guts
rapid
drink?
shine. Yeah. It'll be too ridiculous. No, without drink. That's in the lobby. I typically don't use the guts drink. I prefer shift it because I have very, very low attack as it is.
Makes sense. Alright, so then I think with that, let's kind of talk briefly about the epilogue at this point here. I don't have anything queued up here, but one of the points that I picked up from that did have to do with what Kashra was saying at the end, in that basically there's the potential for anti-photon groups to start appearing, even within the arcs. And that kind of, in a way, shadows what happened in Phantasy Star Online Episode 3, Card Revolution, in that you had the Hunters Guild, and then you also... the Hunters Guild and the upper structure of Pioneer 2's command there, as well as the Arcs, which were the splinter group that had stolen some of the card technology. Both groups were essentially trying to find the Amplum Umbra, but they were essentially one group against the other in that respect.
And to avoid any confusion, it's a completely different hoax. Spelled with a Z and not related.
Correct. It's still funny that they put something like that in, and then suddenly, yeah, once again, Arcs versus Arcs, I guess, comes up.
In PSO Episode 3, there's a possibility that Arcs may have named themselves after the Moon of Coral, which happens to be named Arca.
Yep, that is true. And we do know that the Pioneers did come from there.
Yep.
Although, I mean, it doesn't really matter since Sega can just add whatever weapons they want, but the two weapons that VL Hunar can drop, the Corrupted Cannon Tishia and the Corrupted Spear Ephemera, I think. Those are both references to Phantasy Star 3, or Episode 3 of Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah, and kind of going off topic a little bit for just a brief moment here. I know that Episode 3 and kind of this connection of how PSO connects to everything else. there was always the question of what was going on with Pioneer 3, which had launched. And Arawen, you had purchased some material that had apparently been related directly to that. Did you ever finish looking through that at all?
I'm very slowly translating it. When I get done with the first chapter, I'll post it. But I haven't gotten deep enough into it to figure out what's going on with Pioneer 3 yet. The beginning part actually opens up with a flashback, and it seems like they're going to go over what happened during the main events of PSO in the novels.
Well, regardless, I look forward to your translations, since I can't. I just look at the pictures in those things.
Same here. I'm definitely looking forward to that translation for certain. Let's see. One of the other things that I picked up on, of course, was that, you know, everybody is saying, well, and you had pointed this out earlier, Arawen, actually, that everybody was saying that, okay, yeah, well, the darker threat, or rather, while Primordial Darkness and the Dark Falls are gone, we technically aren't done with the Darkers yet. So why don't you talk a little bit more about that there?
So, after the ending of PSO Episode 6, during some parts of the epilogue, and mostly from NPCs that you can chat with in the lobby, they mention that the Darker threat is still present, and that they still have to fight Darkers, even though the Profound Darkness is gone. There's a possibility, this is theoretical, that if enough Darkers congregate in an area, that maybe a new Dark Falls might have the ability to be born, because Matoi, when she was the second Claris Clays, she started to become a Dark Falls, or the vessel for a Profound Darkness, after she absorbed enough False Spawn factor or Darker factor. So there may be a possibility that if enough Darker factor gathers, that a new Dark Falls Profound Darkness could come into existence.
Unfortunately, it's really determined on how intertwined you think the games actually are. And no opinion is more correct than others. Sega has flat out said that they wanted Phantasy Star Online to be directly connected to Phantasy Star 3, and even though those hints are there, it's never officially instated, or officially in the game files, so it's anyone's guess. Personally, I do believe that they are connected, and it's a heavy spoiler for those of you who haven't played Idola, but there are falls in the future after PSO2 ends, so there is a possibility that what we currently believe is the true Profound Darkness of Oracle is a smaller part of something that's a lot bigger.
Yep, definitely. A couple of points to that, and I guess we're kind of launching into also our predictions for the future here as well. Yeah, you're right. There are other Dark Falls that are coming, and in fact, Global is very much aware of Theatra at this point. Mm-hmm. But I think there was another that was very recently revealed, which was Cave.
Yes, it was Dark Falls Cave.
How much do we know about them at this point?
Currently, we know that it's the patron falls of the Kanseed Nation, and it's seemingly a reference to the allegory of the cave by Plato, in which people living in a cave and who take in their history and their knowledge based off of shadow puppetry with a fire behind them are doomed to have a short-sighted view of the world because they're still within the bounds of their cave. And it's pretty much just an allegory for think outside the box, step outside the cave, see the world for yourself. And even though these people on Vandor have essentially taken the remaining ARKS technology on that place and used it for their own gains and have become the most technologically advanced people on Vandor. They seemingly are the most short-sighted, since they are readily employing the use of D-Factor in their weaponry, even though realistically, if they knew what it was and what it could lead to, they would not be doing that.
Another thing I want to add is that the name Canseed is apparently both a reference to the zodiac Cancer, while also being a reference to the seed, possibly.
Huh. No, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's right there in the name, isn't it?
Yeah. God, I'm embarrassed I didn't even think of that. And I really wish, I guess with Seed, should we head into NGS and what we think dolls are?
Yeah, let's start into that as well here if you want to.
So, NGS, we are ARKS on an unknown planet. We have a town, and we're going to explore. And that's pretty much the premise of everything that we actually do know. The dolls that we see have two very distinct components to their physiology. The first being a very stretchy photon-like substance which glows, which is why we segued from Seed, which also have a similar bioluminescence to them, and with the Seed Vitans it actually does extend out like the dolls do. They also have a outer shell which does seem to be man-made just from the grooves, and I believe there may have been worn out symbols on them as well, but that may not be the case. I don't actually remember anymore. And just for introductory information, the new Ash, or whatever we'll end up calling him down the line, the number 4 on his suit probably denotes the 4th generation of ARKS, which is why he's readily able to switch from a sword to a rifle, which traditionally would not be the case for ARKS unless they were to have both Hunter and Ranger as their main and subclasses respectively, and not in the sense that multi-class weapons exist, but in the sense that you can't effectively use a weapon without their respective photons.
Yep, so definitely seems like a multi-class switching, potentially even only having one class may be in play for this game. If we go back... Go ahead.
Oh, another thing I want to mention about New Genesis, apparently, this, from what I know about the lore with the way Photon works, I believe it was brought up that Photon can only harm darkness, but they're hunting enemies like native creatures with Photon weapons, so that makes me wonder if everything in New Genesis might have a D-Factor component in it.
I believe it's a little bit different from that, in the sense that Darkers can only be truly killed or fully destroyed with a photon blade. And if using conventional weapons, or conventional in the case of the Dragon, or Draconians, Dragonkin, depending on which version of the game you play, because they use conventional weapons in the sense that they use metal, bone, rock, for their armaments, they can only ground them into photons and absorb them, and that's why they can't efficiently kill them.
Yeah, I was basing my assumption off of the scene where Affin had shot his sister to prove that she was not a false because the photon didn't kill her.
Ah, that's a good point there. I would suspect though that there's got to be some sort of other physical element in play with that, with New Genesis. Possibly, maybe we're going to maybe it's not just only photons that are being shot out. Maybe there's some sort of physical element added into it as well to make it like a combination of regular and as well as photonic weapon at the same time.
However, the Tames, as Sega named them, they do dissipate into blue light when defeated, so that is something to note.
a good point as well. Going back to the epilogue real quick, one other thing is that Xiao did mention that he's also going to be working on calculating how things are going to end up with this new timeline. So there is the possibility that he is going to be around at the time when New Genesis is going on, since really for someone like that, 1,000 years is nothing.
Yep. He doesn't age. He's a photon creature, so time is completely irrelevant to him. And honestly, I would expect Xion to pop back up, because she's already lied once to us when she said that she was going to die. So I would not be surprised if she's back.
That is possible. And something else I want to bring up here is sort of the question of, is it possible that the Akashic Record actually did see this future that we have? This kind of goes into a combination of sort of the timeline that I've been working at, and also the presence of certain characters in Episode 5. And so I'm going to bring up one of the materials I have here. Now, this is sort of a timeline of, and this is a really simplified version, so you're going to find some missing elements on this here. But this is effectively the timeline of what we were looking at here in PSO2, as well as sort of how everything else connects to everything else here. At least from, if we were to take everything as being canon. Sega has in the past said certain things are not canon, but once you start having characters showing up on board a ship and talking to the main character, not just only in text, but with voice lines, it kind of becomes hard to say that something's not canon. But the main line that you see going up from the bottom to the top, that's basically the timeline that I've got here. So, at the bottom, we have the time loop where we have the bad ending, Primordial Darkness, and the player character come back to the beginning of time. After that, Photoners find Xion, then the Photoners create the Primordial Darkness. Photoners feed Harriet to the Primordial Darkness, at which point then we get to PSO2/Oracle. Inside there, I've got the two time trips that we have here, saving Xeno back in Episode 2, as well as the Persona loop in Episode 3. And then at the top there is the end of Episode 6, where once again we head to the bad ending. Sorry, the arrow isn't showing in the right direction there. And then, of course, we know 1,000 years after this we have New Genesis. And then the thing I've been working at this whole time is Algol Copto being sort of a sequel to the PSO2 story. And the fact that we've got the Great Light being referenced here, the fact that we essentially see the creation of the universe from that Great Light. But also the fact that, as far as we're aware, there's never been any mention of Elise or Lutz or any of the other characters from the classic Algol series showing up on Omega, also showing up elsewhere in the game. So it's really unusual that they showed up. And so I'm wondering, even if the Akashic Record couldn't see that moment, as you referred to earlier, EarningKey, that it may have been able to see beyond that. And one of the points I want to bring up that kind of drives it to that conclusion is the fact that when we initially encounter Omega, it's not running on the same time scale we are. It's instead running at like an accelerated rate where a few milliseconds difference between when the profound darkness enters it and when we enter it, tens or hundreds of years have already gone by since Ephemera started appearing on Omega. And so that's why I'm kind of wondering, even if the Akashic Record couldn't have seen that one moment in time, that it could have seen that potential future where Algol is still several thousand years into the future from when New Genesis is going to be. It's possible Algol could have also been sometime between when the bad ending happened and when the Photoners find Xion. That's another place where this could have come from, but right now my working theory is we're talking Algol Copto being at the end of the timeline rather than closer to the start. And I wanted to get both your feelings on that.
It certainly is within the realm of possibility, especially because of how subspace works. Essentially, there's always a central focal point where the photon memories that envelop the overall plane that you're standing on is sourced from. In this case, it's the light of the player character, the primordial darkness, and Shion, as all three of you go to the ends of the universe and reform it. And in smaller cases, we have Elga Masquerade, which is sitting there with its own hang-ups, sitting there in the ruins of its plans, or literally a downed devil castle right behind it that make up the stage. Or in Phantasy Star Portable, you have the Illuminous base, where they slaughtered all the Magashi units because it's Magashi's photon memory. We've only seen a handful of small-scale situations that have referenced the past, but it is fully within the realm of possibility for the future to be referenced, especially on something at the scale of the Akashic Record itself.
I'm of the opinion that Shion did not observe anything beyond the current ending of Episode 6, and that the Akashic Record not only functions as a record, but also a source, and that there may be things that have originated in the record itself that are born into the universe.
That's an interesting idea. So you're saying that those characters might have just simply been created from there not being any history of them?
Yes, because of the fact that the Akashic Record comes from the player after having returned to the origin of everything, the universe being born from them, in my opinion, the Akashic Record is also the source of the universe, and so concepts can be born there as well.
That is a possibility. Though, what I would have loved to see was a main character, someone who's actually named and has actual traits, shown in the record that doesn't have a corresponding analogous version of themselves in the grander Oracle universe. So, Alma lived at one point, Clarice Clays was her photon imaginary friend that actually existed at one point in time. Luther existed, Harriet existed. So unfortunately, without that, it's still unfortunately a toss-up, but it is very possible.
We do, though.
There is an interesting thing with Clarice Clays, because while they mention that she was born from the photons, which could be interpreted as her being from the Akashic Record, but she never had a physical body of her own. She always just existed within Alma. So she might be one of those type of characters that just doesn't have any true form outside of the Akashic Record.
Yeah, I think Alma referred to it as a split personality, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the only other option would be the whole Endu thing as the only alternative. But I don't think weird photon space birth is an option in this case.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. And for anybody that's wondering about the left side of the chart, the lower line up here basically represents the Geralt timeline, up until we can see Emilia and player characters save Rico and Flowen, which effectively invalidates the entire Phantasy Star Online series, since those two characters are now living, and then shortly after Emilia Vivienne visit Oracle, and that's how we can have Rico and Flowen from Regol basically running around with the ARKS in that one featured quest, where it's on the Wopal floating facility.
Yeah, I always assumed that Rico and Flowen ended up in the ARKS universe by riding along with Emilia and Vivian.
Yep.
I'm not 100% sure on if that quest ended up being canon since it was just a tie-in with Anniversary, I believe. But what is true is that because of Emilia and the player characters' interventions, both Rico and Floan were able to be saved from their respective fates as Dark Falls and Org of Flow. And their respective epilogue does end on them thanking the player and Emilia while the Pioneer safely landing on Ragol and true colonization starting. So essentially, we might even be working with two split timelines on Ragol. And that just further complicates things.
I think it's significant that the Emilia and Vivian events get archived in the ARKS Chronicle.
Hmm.
Yeah, those were fully voiced scenes. It wasn't just a simple here's a few quests along with some text. They got actual voice scenes, and that's why I was saying earlier that once you start going to that level, it's really hard to say that something is non-canon at that point.
Did the Evangelion collab end up in the ARKS Chronicle as well, or no?
No, I don't think they've
Not
touched
by
that
much.
thing ever since episode 3, if I'm being honest.
Okay. So that
I-
puts it on a level above that because it actually did end up in like a chronicled story
Hmm.
viewer.
Yeah, you can still see like the different movies from episode 4 to 6 in there, but that's about it.
One little weird thing to note about that event in itself is that when Emilia and the player character were stranded on Ragol, and they realized it wasn't the VR mag simulation, the pod that they entered from was actually able to self-repair. And the events of the DLC only happened because they got curious on who Rico was, and Nagisa ended up having a kinship with her and realized that Rico was... I guess she had a death wish, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, another... Go ahead.
Yeah. But in the PSO2 event, we actually have to help get components to actually repair the ship, and she has to go down to Naberius and repair it herself.
Yep, and then there's
I
the
lo-
whole thing that VVN and Amelia even met somehow as well.
I look forward to playing that soon because the translation project mentioned that they would have it done by the end of the year.
Vivian and Amelia do meet in a prologue, I believe, or a side quest, in which I believe she's doing the same thing that Magashi did at the end of PSU, in which she just goes off and starts purifying corrupted creatures on her own and searching for her own answers. It's one of the few nods between the two games in which she says that the player character reminds her of her friend if you were able to port over your character's save data. And even though technically you don't have ID and you don't necessarily have to look the same, she can sense that it's your light. But she makes it very obscure so that Amelia doesn't catch her.
Yep, and even with them visiting the ARKS, they're still talking about things like that they want to find that person again.
Mm-hmm.
I think let's get back into the topic of what we're thinking the dolls are. Arawen, you had brought up something really interesting here, which I think could be a very good idea as to where they're coming from here.
Yeah, so this goes back to Phantasy Star Nova, which is quite obscure for the English community because there has been little to no translation related to it. And in Phantasy Star Nova, there is there's a race called Machians, which, based off of evidence in the game, they are very human-like. The Machians created, they're pretty much all dead, or at least portrayed to be all dead in Nova. and they left behind these machines all over their planet, Machia. And the machines are referred to as Gigantus because they're all gigantic machines, but some of them resemble dolls. Like this, I can't remember what's the Romanization of the name?
I'm not sure myself.
Alcyone is the name of this, Alcyone is the name of this enemy, and it resembles some of the dolls. And the story behind the Machians that gets brought up, based off of the few translations that I've found, is the Machians were at war with the Photoners before the Arks existed. And the Machians, in order to keep Photoners off of their planet, they built these Gigantus, and in fact, there is a Gigantus called Nova that surrounds the planet itself. And it attacks any Photoners it detects within its vicinity, and it uses... The machines are able to absorb all the photons in the area and leave no photons behind, which effectively disables photoner weapons in the area. In fact, that is the reason why the ship in Phantasy Star Nova that the Arks are in, I forget the name of the ship right now.
Delta variant.
Delta variant, yeah. The Delta variant ends up crashing because it can't fly because the photons have been nullified. And they get stranded on this planet and they can't use their normal photon weaponry. But they find out that the machines are using an alternate energy source called Glan, and they're able to modify some of their photon weapons to use this Gran energy. Another interesting thing to note is that Gran energy has a yellow glow, which looks like doll cores. Dolls in New Genesis have yellow cores. But anyways, the Machians, they were at war with the Photoners. We never really figured out why the Photoners were attacking the Machians, but in episode 5 of PSO2, it's mentioned that the Photoners were capturing races to create the Arks. And it's possible that Machians might have been one of the races that the Photoners were taking to do experiments on them in an attempt to create Arks.
I think I'll also add the fact that they were just creating all these different Xion clones. It was like, I don't think they really cared what was going on in the universe. They could pretty much just overpower anything that they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I'll note here is this Alcyon that we're looking at here. It does seem like they have the same kind of bioluminescence in their body here, aside from the tentacles, whereby they're basically able to change what color they are as well. So I think you picked up on something really, really critical here.
Also, when you might notice with them attacking the core here, when the core is neutral, it's yellow, but when it's supercharged, it turns red.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit further into the video. Let me see if I can show that here. Yeah, like right there.
Yeah, and when the machines get really enraged, they start glowing red like that.
Yeah, and even here you can see the tentacles are more red than they were before. So, yeah, this
now, not all the enemies, not all the Gigantus have this look. This is unique to the squid one. But it's possible that dolls might have many variants, just like Darkers did. We only saw the bug Darkers at first, but there was many other types of Darkers. So it's possible that if the dolls are related to the Machians, we might have many different variants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Something else I want to bring up here, though, is, though, we're also looking at the primordial darkness, and potentially how now 1,000 years later. I mean, that's just a standard. That's sort of the standard resurrection time for whenever that does come back up again. At least when it comes to Algol. Granted, it was never exactly 1,000 years, but it was somewhere around there. You had Real Cross, which kind of helped serve as that warning system for Algol. But I'm wondering now, because as I was going through the end of PSO2 myself, the idea of how many loops had been in play had crossed my mind, and I was like wondering, okay, even if Shiva, well, I know that Shiva doesn't know this now, but since the primordial darkness itself had been through this loop, and we can only assume that it had been conscious, I suppose, in a way, for each one of those loops, it would have the knowledge of every single loop that it had gone through. Rupichu, I'm not aware of any Vita emulators, unfortunately. So if it had been through so many loops before, then it should have gotten really, really good at knowing how many forces it would need to send out to get back to that particular point in time, so it could try to do something different each loop, and essentially know how to hold off on Dark Falls. Now, this is if Algol happens in the past, not in the future. But if it had gotten good like that, holding off a certain number of Dark Falls to only appear on Algol, and then a certain number of Falls to only appear during the time of PSO2, is it possible that it has amassed a certain number of Dark Falls just held in reserve after knowing how many it would need in each particular section of the timeline to now, in New Genesis, potentially overwhelm the forces of the Great Light at that point in New Genesis? And is it possible that that each doll may actually be a Dark Falls? Or, now building off of what you got here, is it possible we might be looking at some Dark Falls Machian combinations here?
I guess I'll start. I would doubt that every doll is an individual Falls, just because they do seem to have throwaway enemies, like every faction does. And the title of Dark Falls usually is something that doesn't get placed onto throwaway enemies, if aside from the one point in Phantasy Star 4 where they just throw waves of falls at you.
I think the Prophalos is what you're talking about?
Yep.
I think the dolls appear to be too mechanical to actually be Dark Falls. They might be... I feel like that there might be an ARKS Splinter faction or Machians that are controlling them, because they definitely have more mechanical features. They break open like robots, some of them, and then they also, some of them have energy packs on their back that look like batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
so,
I noticed that as well.
That's why I think, and also going in with them being called dolls themselves, I think that there might be another faction that actually commands them, and it's not Profound Darkness or Dark Falls. That there might be a rival human faction involved.
It
is very possible.
Yeah, we know that ARKS is not all that there is in Oracle. It's possible there could be such a splinter group coming into play. I would say also another possibility is it's possible that going to your point about Episode 5 there, it's possible some of the ARKS may in fact learn that they're Machian. And at that point then create such a splinter group as well. We also don't know what became of the Delta Valiant also after it left Machia. We don't know if it ever arrived back in Oracle. At least I don't think we do.
Also, another thing, Kasra in the epilogue mentioned the possibility of anti-photon factions that were against the use of photons, and that's essentially what Makia is as a civilization.
Yep, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Though, unfortunately, we don't know what the purpose of the dolls is, or if they have any photon nullification properties. What we can tell from the environment, however, is that the planet is more or less photon saturated. So everything you do, every step you take, you are shifting around visible photons. Those little balls you would see in the free fields that bump up and down, it's just that much more dense than it was in PSO2 proper.
Yep, even the trees and rocks have photon lines through them. And then there's also, for some reason, also there's like metal plating in some of the open field there. So it's a question of what caused that to happen.
Though that might be a little bit of a hint at whatever the ruins analogous area is.
Could be. Ripichu, it's typically a bad thing if there are too many photons condensed, because that's what can lead to corruption.
Yep. So photon condensation usually occurs in various ways that are either mildly inconvenient to catastrophically terrible. The most mild case would be New Days' Forbidden District, where if you were to venture in there, the photons were so condensed that you would instantly feel fatigue, nausea, and you would have to either vacate the premises or you'd pass out. In the worst case scenario, you would either die, or in the case where it's not just general photons, where it's actually a concentrated amount of photons, it would either lead to elemental infection of some sort, or it would actually lead to becoming a falls over to a darker, depending on whether or not it's D-factor related.
As far as the other possibilities of who could be behind the dolls, after EarningKey was posting updates about the new Idola chapter in Japan, I started thinking that maybe Canseed might be an ARKS splinter group that could be the faction that deploys the dolls.
So for those of you who haven't played the Japanese version of Idola Phantasy Star Saga, Canseed is able to deploy firearms on a mass-produced basis. They're able to use photons that resemble negaphotons, or the red and black photons that we see in PSO2, to forcibly fate diverge someone in the chaos. And they have working telepipes, as well as what is presumed to be a spacefaring vessel. And I would wholeheartedly agree. It is very possible.
Brightstar, you can put up any of those pictures. About them.
That was number 2 there. I think actually you're looking for maybe this one here.
Okay, so in this one, the Canseed is doing a bombardment of. Oh, that one is the machine that. One of the machines that Canseed deploys, and it looks like a mobile suit from Gundam called an Efreet. And the Efreet has something in it called the exam system, which is able to steal the souls of pilots that are new types, which are a type of psychic. And it turns the new type's soul into part of the machine itself. And a big plot point in that is that all the exam system mobile suits needed to be destroyed in order for the souls to rest. I don't know if that has any parallel in the Idola or Phantasy Star lore in the future. It was just something interesting that I noted, because apparently the design of that enemy is at least based off of that mobile suit.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that one of the designers did create one of the characters in PSO2, Elise, and that's why They don't show up in the global version, just because of that collaboration there. But it's possible that there could have been some influence. I'll bring back up with that other picture.
Yeah, so here, Canseed is deploying, they apparently have orbital bombardment weapons, and they destroy this entire town. And apparently they're firing dark energy, too.
Hmm?
Yeah, it has that reddish hue there.
It is important to note, though, that we have not seen a single aircraft in any contact from NGS at this point.
Yeah, the
Well,
closest
sort
thing
of. You got that floating thing that I've been referring to as an air castle. Brightstar
Right.
thinks it looks like a subspace ship.
Yeah, over on New Genesis, yeah.
I think that the dolls might be dropped from it because of the way they are shown in the initial trailer.
Hmm?
It could be. Definitely. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the other pictures that you had me line up here?
Yeah, the picture with the throne here. EarningKey can probably tell you more about that throne. But they have dark energy being extracted that they're using.
Sure. So, for the nation of Canseed, it's a very steampunk, early 16th century English looking area in a barren wasteland. Their castle is sitting on top of a glowing red cave where we presume the Dark Falls' photon mass is actually stored. The queen, or highest royal family heiress to Canseed, sits on a throne that glows red, and specifically it glows upward red. She has various tubes that are actually attached to her person, which seem to be extracting something, whether it's blood or actual photons from her, upward, and that may actually be the source of Canseed's photon arsenal, or at least what's powering it. Although it's not necessarily fully clear, what we do know is that this is very much related to Darker Factor in some way, shape, or form because of that reddish glow. And oddly enough, their regular lighting in their castles use a purple glow, which is Megiphoton based, or dark elemented photons, which aren't necessarily related to Darkers of themselves.
I think I'd also add, if they're using something like that, and they basically need to have that energy extracted from them, that sounds like somebody that has a little too much photon potential and might not have been able to be turned into a caste just because the idea doesn't exist on this world.
Right. The only casts on Idola are those that have survived since the ARK ship crashed, and those that are... I don't know if Canseed can make casts. If they have the ability to deploy mechs, and mechs of a completely different design than the ones we've seen in the ruins in the first episode, then it is very possible that they could create something close to what we could call casts in the other games.
The other possibility is that their monarch has a D-factor infection, and they're extracting the D-factor from her to keep her under control.
Mm-hmm. From the very, very few lines we get from her, she does seem of her own right mind. So if she is the host of this Dark Falls cave that we're introduced to, or if she's related to it in some way, shape, or form, then yes, they're pumping out something out of her to make her still retain her humanity.
It's an interesting solution, that's to be certain. The only question is, how long could something like that be sustained for?
Well, we know that their intention is to free, or at least unseal Dark Falls Cave by gathering the different Idola bearing Zodiates, or Zodiates. So it may only be just to serve as their source of armaments. Once they have their objective completed, they may just stop the process entirely.
That's true.
But the I'm sure some people may be wondering why we're digging into Idola as much as we are, and right now Idola is one of the most important Phantasy Star games to look at when thinking about NGS, just because of the proximity of when their stories take place. As of right now, the story is as such where 1,200 years after a certain dark deity, or Dark Falls in this case, was sealed away, the events of Idola Phantasy Star Saga's Episode 1 takes place. That should be around the same point as where we are currently in PSO2, so roughly 200 years after NGS would typically start, if they were to add up 1 to 1. Now, in the event where they are in completely different dimensions or in sets of subspaces where time flows differently, that might actually account for that 200 years that we're rounding off. But we do have some concrete tie-ins, such as Janae, Matoy, Luther as a photon memory, and he can become his old Photonar self or his purified Dark Falls loser self. And Seraphy, who is the PSO2 ES handler for the player character, they all appear as playable characters in Idola.
There's also a tavern named after Astarte, which serves the same purpose as Astarte's tutorials.
And for she's the person in charge of Arks Row, the tutorial quests. She's on the left side of the gate in the lobby area.
Yep. One interesting thing is that there is a new character that was introduced through that history timeline that we have never heard of before, and that is Aquilo. They are supposedly the leader that brought the Arks to the world of Vandor in the first place, and I've never run across anybody named that before. So,
no, the name doesn't line up.
Also, going into what the possibility of the type of arcs that he was part of, they apparently set themselves up to be god kings over the civilization on Vandal, which to me is a departure from the way Arks usually acts, which makes me think that they might be a rogue group of Arks that founded the Vandal civilization.
That may not necessarily be true, just because how time has a sense of distorting history. The most relevant example being the events of Phantasy Star 3, where Arachio and Leia and their party defeated and sealed Dark Falls on the Elisa 3, but their descendants thought that the other party's descendants were terrible people, and they eventually just revered them as god kings of their own. What we do know is that a minimum 4 Arks touched down from a camp ship, which was eventually called the Ark of Aquilo. There are at least 18 weapons that are still presumably fully functioning, and the reason that Theater feared the Holy Sword Lionel is because it was a fully functioning photon saber, and that would be one of the few weapons that could actually kill Theater.
Yep. Going to that idea, though, if we wanted to play that out, there is potentially one group that may still in some way exist within the Arks, even though they were technically disbanded, and that would be Void.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think back, and we didn't talk about this at all, but during Episode 6, there's also the tale of what happens with the 3 class representatives between Stratos, Kyokia, and Lucote, and how Lucote had been kidnapped by the Void Facility group, and essentially forced to fight Darkers over and over and over until they were themselves going to be infected. And if it hadn't been for Maria, she potentially could have become a Darker or false herself. And so that could be potentially a representative that they might still be operating in some way from the shadows, even if their group is not still there anymore. It's actually kind of similar, if I remember correctly, to what happened to Black Paper back in PSO.
Yes, it is. Fortunately, though, we do have Luther as a playable character, and despite that, unfortunately, it does not shed that much information regarding ARKS operations in the area. But it would definitely seem to fit in, since Void would want any access to live subjects, and setting themselves up as god kings or holy people would definitely allow them to lure in eager supplicants for their experimentations.
Yeah, so interesting. I guess we'll have to see if we do ever get some sort of reference to them in the future of Idola. Yeah, New Genesis, I mean, we still don't know a whole lot about that. As I said before, I had posited the idea that that those ships might have been subspace vehicles that could potentially lead to, in expansions of New Genesis, then going to other worlds of that we've seen before, whether that be Goral, or Regol, or potentially also helping to explain kind of how the Earthmen eventually found Algol as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's a lot that needs to be unpacked in that, because that in of itself is its own time loop. In that the start of everything has the Earthmen basically destroying their home world, and they find Algol, who they work to take over. They brought along with them a Dark Falls inside of Pandora's box. How a Dark Falls got there can be explained in just a moment, but essentially one thing that they do is they essentially crash the space satellite Garia into Palma, destroying the planet. Then the people of Palma escape on the world ships, and as part of that story in Phantasy Star 3 Generations of Doom, you have a choice of who you can marry, and depending upon the path that you take, can lead to a time warp that essentially leads you back to Earth, where you're contacted by, I think it was the London Communications Center, and this is apparently around the time, or potentially sometime after, that the ARKS arrived on the planet, but it's like no mention of this was ever made when the ARKS were there, nor did the ship ever show up in the skies. So it's like, when did this all happen? But because there was a Dark Falls on board the Elisa 3 when you arrived there, that's how they got their own Dark Falls, essentially. And so the time loop continues until you pick a different person to marry, essentially. And those other paths then lead to the Elisa 3 either ending up... and I think this is actually a good time for me to bring up your thing here, EarningKey.
Sure.
The map that you put together. There is... If you look in the upper left corner, there's Algol, but then there's this line that's representative of the Exodus of Palma. And one of the lines has the Elisa 3 carrying Dark Falls. One of that also goes to Regol. Speculation could potentially also go to, I think that's Coral that you're representing there.
Yep.
And then in another path, the Neo Palma, not the Elisa 3, ends up being the Sacred Ark in Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity.
Since one of the alternate endings in Phantasy Star 3 actually allows for the Elisa 3 to dock with the Neo Palma, and then both of them to continue to their intended destination, we know that that's the non-canon ending to it. So it does confirm that the Neo Palma is out there. It did leave Palma, and it didn't suffer the same regression of society that the Elisa 3 did, since they were able to open up comms on their own and acted in accordance with military protocol by first of all, knowing that the ship was called Elisa 3 in the first place, and by hailing them. So basically the purpose of this whole graph is just to note that the biggest takeaway of it is, even if you don't necessarily believe in the content where specific things leading from one game to another exist, whether or not you think those are legitimate in themselves, or if you think that if Sega had intended for it, they'd flat out say it, there are certain aspects of every Phantasy Star game that are universal and that help explain certain things that would normally not make sense in the series. We know that Dark Falls are weak to light because they're mainly made of Meiji photons because of the relationships established in PSU. It's small things like that that allow us to actually explain things that occur in Phantasy Star in a more scientific, or pseudoscientific, I guess at this point, lens, and gives us a base assumption so that we can actually understand and make more accurate predictions about things moving forward. As for the actual events that happen, for those of you who've played the Japanese version of Phantasy Star Universe, if you've owned the saber Holy Elcidian, or Elicion, or however it's pronounced, you actually knew that Omega existed 10 years before Episode 5 came out. Because its description literally read, a sword that was taken from the place where the souls of the planet's defenders returned to. And for that, it was a complete mystery up until the point where Episode 5 came out, and all the photon memories of people who have either were to be or have been are all in this one place. And we actually do see the Holy Sword in some form as the Laconian sword that Elisa brandishes. And for those of you playing on the JP side, they're actually adding the Twin Saber version of that weapon in with the new Divide Quest update.
I also want to mention that Elicion, the Japanese version of the name, includes the name Shion, which was like the librarian for the Akashic Record in PSO2.
Hmm?
And also in classic Phantasy Star, Elicion, the sword itself, holds the souls of warriors in Algol.
Right. Yeah, it seems to have some sort of special property that prevents them from returning to Omega, as it were, at least until the sword breaks, when the profound darkness there is finally destroyed. Yeah. And this is why, for regular viewers of my channel, this is why I say Kingdom Hearts has nothing on this series. You have to think about this through time and multiple dimensions to even wrap your head around what's actually going on in this series.
Mm-hmm. It is one big, beautiful mess. Though it really boils down to how much Sega's willing to confirm. Since, as much as we'd like to believe that something's 99% feasible and it lines up perfectly, until Sega gives the go-ahead, we won't actually know.
Agreed. All of this is speculation, basically, but
yeah,
it's speculation that's lining up like it seems like Sega has a plan, and they've had a plan for a long time. For example, thinking back to Phantasy Star Portable 2, in the introduction of that, you see flowers at the start, and then, but they're red in color, and then, what do you know, Ephemera shows up in Episode 5, and then there's also a lyric in there about a hole in the sky.
Yep. I think my favorite example of Sega tripping over, or at least being slow to implement a confirmation, was with the solo Ultimate Quest with Elga Masquerade. since essentially the story of the solo Ultimate Quest is that you fight Elga Masquerade over and over and over again, and Shiera tells you that there's Aether in the area and that it's super weird. That's it. That's the only thing that's actually flat out told to you. What's actually shown to you, however, is the music changes, the skybox changes, and the mood shifts from depressing to enlivened. And essentially, it boils down to Elga Masquerade building up the confidence and the Photon Mass to break out of his depression after being defeated after Episode 5, and literally breaking the tear of his subspace prison and becoming the persona we see in the emergency quest at the end of Episode 5. It was never actually confirmed until the ultra hard version of the quest, where instead of just breaking his shell and then just sitting there and flailing his arms, he flourishes a sword that he had during that ultimate quest, and for a brief second, his stage 1 mask actually appears over his head, and he continues the fight that way. So Sega is rather quick to tie up certain loose ends, so they're aware of all these connections, more so than we give them credit for. So it's something that will at least make a note of, even if you don't necessarily believe that they are relevant.
Yeah, there's just so much that goes on that there are probably things that have happened that we haven't even noticed yet. I would not be surprised.
Yes. Hmm?
Arawen, I know I had a few more photos from you here. Did you want to go over those, or are we good on those?
Well, if you want to bring up the last one, the last one that you had put up with the no, that one, yeah. Now, EarningKey, that thing on his back that looks like a capsule, what is that?
Give me a second, the stream's not updated for me.
Is that ever explained?
Looks like some sort of reddish fluish or something.
What's the picture of? Since I'm just stalled on my end.
It's the beta character.
It's an Idola screenshot that you posted of like the beta character.
Oh, the beta character.
So I guess the new Gemini Zodiac.
Oh, the girl with the weird smile. Oh, there we go. So that really creepy little girl is supposedly the head scientist of Ken Seed's R&D military division. For some reason, she has a working key card, which means that they have working labs with actual electronic doors, which, I mean, if they have a spaceship, they might as well. The pack on her back is likely the source of her rifle's energy, and it might be related to whatever the red liquid that they power their weapons with is.
The reason I bring it up is because it looks very, very similar to the energy pack on the back of the giant sword enemy in the original New Genesis trailer.
Ah, the first boss.
Yeah.
It does make sense. It is very similar in design. It's not... Is the one in New Genesis transparent, though?
I can't remember. I'd have to look at...
Even so, it is definitely worth noting, especially when we get our hands on it for the first time. If it ends up being a weak spot, or at least a stunnable point, where if we do enough damage to it, the enemy is stunned, then it definitely warrants a further look into that connection.
Brightstar, I think it's in the old... Yeah, that's the boss, but I think it's in the older trailer where they actually show gameplay of that specific enemy. You can get a good look at its back.
Gotcha. Give me a moment while I try to find that here.
It is definitely a possibility. And I guess while we're waiting, another weird tidbit that connects Idola to NGS is actually the base of operations for all of our arcs. And we actually see a very similar townish area on Vandor where Matoy, of all people, shows up. And it is fully functional. It apparently does have telepipes and a fully working campship launcher. Well, the bay for it, where you can do the special drop. So, seemingly, the tower in the town that we see in NGS and we see in Idola, I think that's the connecting point that allows us to traverse different areas that aren't specific to that individual planet.
Yeah, another thing that I've noticed is that the volcano at the end of the TGS gameplay demonstration, there's a volcano just beyond the area where they fought the boss of the forest area. And that volcano looks remarkably identical to the volcano on that island. Chapter, I think is it chapter 8 or 9 of Idola?
Chapter 8, since it just came out on Global.
Yeah.
Yep.
It looks remarkably identical to that volcano. And it's a very unique looking volcano too.
It is.
Do you know where in the clip it was here? Because I'm looking at this one.
I think they showed it at the end of the trailer.
If I remember correctly, it's right before they do the group lineup in the CGI version of the fight. It should be right before they're fighting it in the CGI. They pan to Ash using the sword and then jumping up on its leg and then hitting its back.
So, like, right here?
It's right after that scene. If you let it play, just let it play.
Okay. Yeah, there it is. I see it now. Yeah, there's some sort of battery.
Yeah,
it might even be liquid
yellow.
In there.
It's yellow, actually, which makes me think maybe it's Gran. Because Gran has that
liquid,
distinct yellow.
If it is liquid, then it definitely is related.
Yeah, so even now we're just making all these connections as to what could be going on here, and unfortunately, we're kind of at an impasse until Sega says more about this here at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When do you think that they might show us more info?
I'm hoping by Q1 or Q2 we're gonna have an alpha or beta test.
Because it's a little weird because if you remember back when PSO2 was announced, they actually announced the alpha test before we saw the first gameplay video.
Yeah, they included the what was it, the alpha code that you had to put in to even get into the alpha in the packaging for Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity.
Yeah.
I don't think we're getting an alpha or a beta for NGS.
Really?
Other than that,
I think we're going straight into the game. The reason I say that,
after they showed us the first gameplay of PSO2, it took 3 months before they started talking about story content.
The reason I think it's going to be right into the actual proper game is in Sega's latest roadmap that Bump.org was so kind to publish. The second half of winter, which is slated from January to March, specifically has the 20th anniversary of PSO slated, which is the exact same insignia used in the reveal trailer for NGS.
Ah. That could be. It would be breaking with tradition, though. I will say that, because when Ambition of the Illuminous was being developed, all players that were playing PSU at the time had access to that beta before it was released. So it would be a break from tradition for Sega to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last time they had a Phantasy Star Online anniversary event. They started holding events in November. So maybe since the anniversary is coming up, maybe they might do something next month with a lot of new Genesis info.
It's possible.
Yeah, it would definitely be possible. I guess we're just going to have to see if they're going to do anything else on the PSO2 side in the meantime, because the other thing we have to consider here is, now the story's over, Sega has to figure out how to pad players over until New Genesis is actually ready. I mean, they can continue to release the seasonal content, of course. We're probably going to get Christmas on Ice again. We're probably going to get, possibly with Wind and Rain again next year. But they've got to do something, and I mean, we know that the new Sodom fight is probably going to go up to 999 stages, just like Omega Masquerade did. But that's only so much of that. They're going to have to do something to keep players going, or else they're going to lose players from the player base until this thing actually comes.
If I remember correctly, it took 3 months for the first person to reach 999 in Masquerade. So it actually does line up if someone wants to be world's first for that, and it would line up with that anniversary event.
Oh, and actually, Rupichu here is saying it's actually confirmed to max at level 100, apparently.
Oh, really? Oh. Great. That means less grinding.
Yep.
Now, because of this, what we've seen about New Genesis, where we're apparently based out of field bases instead of an orbital camp, that makes me think that something disastrous might have happened to Arks and we're stranded on planets. And I'm wondering if later on, maybe after New Genesis develops its story a little bit, if we'll start getting more story content in original PSO that bridges the gap about what may have happened to the Arks.
It would be a smart thing for Sega to do that and retroactively add what happened in that big gap. Though I don't know unfortunately, we don't know the full functionality of the towers in the towns, so we don't necessarily know if they are truly cut off from each other.
We know that it's an open world game. We also know that, well, now that Machia is in play, it's very possible that whatever remnants of Machia there are may have also launched an attack, and that could actually set up what you're saying there and force them out into the field. It's going to be a question, I think, of just how much Sega wants to show us all at one time. Like, is it just going to be that one area of the world that's open at the start, and then are they going to expand it from there, or is there going to be like 5 or 6 areas available at the start? We'll have to see how much they're going to run this thing like a traditional MMO is, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting to note that some of the recent content, specifically the new Rappy costume in Japanese PSO2, is, for the first time, they actually brought Nova content into PSO2.
We have a new Rappy outfit?
Yeah, the one that's not like a Rappy suit, but is more of a Rappy themed outfit.
Oh, okay.
It's from Phantasy Star Nova, and it's the first time they've ever actually brought Nova content into PSO2, and I think it's just interesting that it's been so many years after Nova, and they've kind of started to acknowledge it in a way.
Well, the first time since the last batch, which would be the Nova poses and the standard ARC uniforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, the launch content, there was a code in the game.
It's been quite a lot. It's been quite a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, so more stuff pointing at Nova. Initially, I thought you were talking about the turkey stuff, the Thanksgiving Rappy.
Oh, no.
What is that doing over on the Japanese version? I can understand it on the global version, but why is that coming to Japan?
Because the Japanese side deserves all the NA exclusives, obviously.
Well, they didn't get all the C exclusives, I don't think, or the Korean exclusives.
I It's possible. I think the only exclusive one that I'm aware of is the Special Forces suit that we got from the Buster shop before it got reset.
I thought they also had like a special holiday that never came to Japan.
Yeah, we'll never get Independence Day as an actual lobby.
Okay, so the camos in the current season pass are from C. Okay, gotcha.
Oh.
Yeah, Japanese Twitter really did like our Independence Day lobby that we got. They were actually posting about it, about how they wanted it on their server too, because it looked cool.
I want that America cloak.
They were complaining that their holiday lobbies don't look as cool as our 4th of July lobbies.
Alright, well, I think we're starting to kind of come to the end of things here. Were there any other theories or thoughts that either of you still wanted to bring out here about the future or anything else we've talked about here today?
One of the interesting things, now this comes from me translating Japanese text in the recent TGS videos. In the lobby, there is a shop. They have like a My Shop counter, which sounds similar to My Room, but it's My Shop. But because it has its own NPC like that, and I haven't seen any Visiphones, that makes me wonder if they're going to actually let us open physical shop locations in the map for other players to visit.
I think that was one of the most requested features since we have that in PSU.
Yeah, it would make sense to bring something like that back. Also, the Reputu also was saying maybe they could bring old areas from PSO1 into PSO2 before New Genesis comes up for the anniversary. I wouldn't mind seeing that. I mean, we technically did get a small piece of CCA before.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a group of NPCs standing in one corner that are right next to each other that all seem to have animal-themed names, like Sharky and Koneko. And that has made me theorize that they might be bringing the Lycan race from Idola into PSO2. But that's a little bit of a stretch. But if it is connected with Idola, that's a possibility.
And even if they don't, then we have enough accessories and draconian suits to fill the gap.
But it has made me wonder why they're delaying showing the Dooman. Because that makes me wonder, is it when they do reveal the Dooman, if they might have 2 additional races to show along with the Dooman.
That's a very good point. I didn't even think of that.
I've always wanted to see some sort of a draconian or lizard-like race in the Phantasy Star series.
And yeah, in Idola, they did mention that the Arks did create the Lycans, and the Arks also created another race called... It's the Leprechauns, right?
Yes, the dwarf.
The Gnomes. The Gnomes is what it's called.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Gnomes, they look like the Lalafell from Final Fantasy XIV. They're essentially the PSO equivalent of that type of race.
I'll say this much: if they do introduce gnomes into New Genesis, people are going to stop complaining about the height slider on the global version being limited.
Actually, if they do implement it, and the height slider is a decision from the U.S. branch that the Japanese branch didn't really have too much of a say in. By introducing a race that's focused on short characters, the localization branch might be forced to acknowledge that height more than just censoring it. So it might be a master.
They'll probably just get around it by
plan.
having 3 of them stacked on top of each other, and that's their player model.
Yeah, just throw a nice big coat on top of them. But the other thing we do know is they did mention in the last long thing about New Genesis is that it's actually Sega of America that's going to be working on the global version, rather than it being the current team that's handling PSO2. So that's at least some very good news to see those guys working on this again.
So is the current team ending, and they're just going to graduate into the next game with a new global team?
They might like continue supporting like support tickets and things like that.
Okay.
But in terms of like the support structure for the back end and things like that, Sega of America would probably be working directly with Microsoft at that point in terms of the Azure servers and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Currently, they're using third parties for the majority of PSO2 Global, so they'll probably poach whatever consultants they're working with that they want to keep, and then keep it in-house for the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think the group that's handling it right now, though, is international, so it might be hard to poach some of them. But yeah, maybe there's also a chance that they could fix some of the localization that's been done in PSO2 so far with the global version.
Way too much of them.
Maybe.
I mean,
Still.
Fall Spawn.
Godspeed. they made some changes.
I have more faith in their technical teams to make it one giant server for both JP and global.
That would be the hope out of all this, yeah. That we're finally global, and then I'd be able to actually pick up a weapon that I've been looking for, which never came out, which was the Storm Shade, and that's because it was an old type weapon. I even sent in a ticket asking for it, and they said they're just going to note that it's wanted.
I just want my Kirito cosmetics.
Oh god, when that hits global, that's going to be a mess.
Which one was it again?
We're getting a Sword Art Online collab.
Oh yeah, that's right. I heard about that.
A real one, yeah.
No joke though, I'm actually a Sword Art Online fan, but yeah.
I can't wait to just see like 60 Kiritos in the lobby. That's going to make my day.
Well, we've already had a ton of Sephiroths, I'll say that much.
Yep.
We already have the not Kirito swords.
Oh yes, the blank noirs, which are... I think that was a fan-submitted one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Reputu says they want to see more legacy weapons. I would love to see some more like that. I mean, them introducing the spread needle was actually a really good thing to bring into the game, I would say. Especially having it that high-powered, even for a 14-star weapon.
They had the perfect chance to add shotguns into the game, and they didn't take it.
I'm interested in what their plans are with the right and left-handed weapons that have shown up in the Japanese text.
Yeah, that's something from Phantasy Star Universe, that you used to be able to equip things in your right hand and your left hand.
Yeah, all we've seen so far is right-handed weapons, but the unique thing is all the weapons that have dropped are single-handed weapons. Like, they're weapons that are usually dual-wielded for the most part in PSO2, but they've been dropping with the R next to their name in the New Genesis videos. Another interesting thing is that all the weapons that they've revealed for actual gameplay in New Genesis, none of those weapons have been shown dropping.
Huh.
And we have not seen anything with an L next to it indicating left hand yet, so I really don't know what they could be planning for left hands.
Yeah, and if anything, I'm wondering now if this potentially could be spelling the end of the bouncer as well.
Well, you could probably just take 2 single swords and make dual blades with them.
I'm talking more about the jet boots, though.
Oh.
I mean,
Rod is
maybe
still
right foot, left
technically
foot.
They might keep it from PSU where certain weapons have to be held to a certain degree, so it takes up both the right and left slot at the same time.
That's true. Yep, like the sword or the axe.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed is that all of the weapons that have the R prefix, they have the name of the weapon is still plural. So it makes me wonder if they dual wield when you equip them alone until you equip something to your left hand, and then whatever left-handed thing you equipped will just replace the left hand of that weapon.
That's gonna get so messy if the fixes carry over.
Yeah, and plus, the Japanese side has such a huge jump on all that at this point. I mean, look at those crest weapons and like how they're getting like 400 attack out of those things and such.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't even know about the weapon thing, so I'm excited.
I wrote this down. The only weapons that I've spotted dropping is twin machine guns, fists, and then wand, and they all have an R next to them.
Single knuckle. That, it would be a wild sight.
Yeah, we've had like single sabers, single knives, but never a single knuckle before.
Never a knuckle.
Might be fun to punch something and then, I don't know, cast the technique in its face as well.
Mm-hmm. If maybe that's where they said that mags would operate differently. Maybe they'll bring back ranged and tech mags.
Yeah, RCMS and TCMS.
I have noticed that a lot of New Genesis seems to be based off of Phantasy Star Universe concepts. Like
this will show my bias, but rightfully so.
Yeah, the fact that there are field bases and things like that out there is reminiscent of the journey that you had to make to just get to some of the places.
Possible return of physical player shops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on there.
I mean, for all we know, Geralt may have actually come into play here because of that Emilia Vivian trip over to the Arks. We really don't know.
Couldn't get anything from the skybox though, unfortunately.
The dolls dropping in reminded me of a seed fall.
Mm-hmm. That is true. And the photon saturation is something that is more unique to Geralt than any other place aside from Vandal.
Yep, and even with Geralt, you had some tentacled creatures there, like the Seed Vants and things like that.
Yeah. And they were the only species of Darker to ever have a blue bioluminescence to them. So it is very odd that the similarities are there.
Yeah, so I guess we'll have to see how that all plays out. Any other predictions or comments or anything either if you want to bring up?
Speaking of PSU, Clementine has announced that they might be launching on October 31st.
Good for
yes.
them. About time. I'm very happy that didn't end in a tragedy.
Yeah, the one thing, as far as I'm aware, that they still don't have are the episode, well, really all the stories, but in particular, episode 3. As far as I'm aware, Agrajag is the only one that has access to that at this point, and I wish they would share those story files so that they could be implemented on Clementine.
Mm-hmm. They could probably scrape them from PSUpedia, though. Or at least the scripts.
Possibly. But the actual server file
Yeah.
codes and all that sort of stuff, that might be difficult without what they have.
I do have one thought, just to be on record. I feel like the class restriction on photon arts and weapons will probably be left out, and classes themselves will probably be with the skill trees that we've gotten in PSO2. So anyone can use a sword, but defensive skills will be relegated to hunters, while more weak point based skills will be rangers.
That could be.
I did notice in the trailer when they did the class demonstrations, they were focused mostly on weapon. Like the class is the weapon. And that makes me wonder if we might not actually have class separation, and that we're all one class, and then we choose to go down a hunter, ranger, or force tree, which we can develop in different aspects.
I had the same thought, and they actually do something kind of similar to that as well in Final Fantasy XIV, although it's more you do become a class at that point, but it's based on the weapon that you equip, rather than it being classless.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the fly class switching or having no class at all does seem like the next evolution that needs to happen for the series.
Although, in my very, very, very petty perspective, the one thing that needs to happen to PSO2 is they have to finally add the Adele Fusil as a usable rifle. Because I'm very tired of having the Edel Arrow and the Ellie Scion as the two holy grail weapons, with the rifle not there.
Gotcha.
I also feel like they need to work more on making classes synergize to encourage cooperation between players, because I don't know, it felt like PSO2 in its current state became a little bit too solo focused instead of multiplayer like an online game should.
Yeah. Actually, they have a good opportunity, because I noticed it seems like the combat is a little bit slower in New Genesis than it is in PSO2, especially since now you're not worrying about the timing aspect of making sure you hit your perfect attacks. So it's possible there may also be an opportunity for them to bring a feature from Phantasy Star and the Millennium into New Genesis, and that's combination attacks. So, like, attacks like, what was it, Detonate, or Efes, or Destruct, and things like that. That might be fun to see them add into New Genesis. I can see that
happening, because they've already demonstrated elements reacting with each other in unique ways, more than just being a weakness. So,
you could have people setting up the elemental
spells might happen.
Especially with those strange Barda symbol we saw, where the enemy got completely petrified. They could probably instantiate it where it's someone taps into that elemental weakness, sets them up into a vulnerable state, and then the non-technique weapons pop that effect for extra damage.
Oh yeah. I wonder if one player can start putting the Barda symbol on the enemy, and then another player can finish it.
That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, Reputu here is also saying they'd like to see weapons to not be class restrictive, like tied to classes, so classes should work closer to what it was like back in Universe. And I guess
that'd be good.
Yeah, I mean, plus in Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity, and I guess to a lesser degree in PSP2, and even in Nova, you could kind of create your class the way you wanted to. With PSP2 and PSP2i, you could essentially break out into different weapons than you could traditionally use by putting points into there. So that might be a fun aspect to bring into all this as well. I don't know if they're going to add something like the rebirth system into New Genesis though.
That would be a little too much.
Yeah.
I'd be interested if I wonder if the enemies that spawn in an area can chase you across a sector boundary, or if they stop. If it's going to be like the old PSO gameplay where you can door snipe.
It might be a line of sight thing, since verticality is a thing as well.
Yeah, plus the fact that there are different world power levels in each of those sectors probably is going to keep them at bay. At least that's what I would think anyway.
It would be funny if somebody can kite it for a second.
That might be fun to try at one point. Just grab a whole bunch of enemies and bring them into town. I mean, I don't see any guards there.
I'm sure there's a photon barrier or something.
That'd be cool if they actually plan on that situation. At least if the enemy can't pass through the load barrier, at least create something where visually it looks like the town's defenses are attacking the enemies and preventing them from proceeding after you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Or if they don't have any defenses, the town essentially dying for a few minutes until it respawns.
Well, so the giant boss enemy in the original trailer, in the cutscene portion, it looks like that town is on fire. So we might have boss raid that wanders into town. I don't know.
Take lessons from mining-based defense too, and just have the city's walls be breakable, and just have hordes of enemies trying to break them.
There you go. Yeah, and then there's that whole aspect of what are we going to be doing with everything that we gather? Because we're not going to have Franca anymore to cook up food for us anymore.
I don't think we need her to tell us how to cook. I think we can experiment, and then the people with low immune systems will die, and then the rest of us will learn how to cook the natural way.
I'm thinking that all of the medicine items might end up having to be player crafted, because they're making us rely on rest assigns instead of monomates, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a medical shop at all.
Likely not. We do have a ridiculous amount we have the same amount of slots for our sub palette, so there definitely should be some kinds of items, but they may be relegated to more status ailing stuff.
There is an item shop in town because one of the shop NPCs says that it's the item shop attendant, but that's all it's called, the item shop attendants, and I don't know what they actually sell in there.
Yeah, and until we can actually see what's actually inside those menus and such, we're not really going to have a good idea. I mean, Restimates and Moon Atomizers, I guess, they're just going to... Go ahead.
I think it would be interesting that if we are going to have progression across different field lobbies, they could bring in the aspects of the old games where there's different items for sale at different locations.
That would be fun, especially if they're building this up to be a more traditional MMO. One of my plans is, as soon as it comes out, I'm just going to grab a sword as a hunter, and I'm just going to run as far as I can, trying to parry everything that I can, and just try to make it to whatever end game is right at the start, just to see if I can do it.
That's a thought. I think I'll probably be able to equip my Rappy Shrine right away, since it just requires 5 decks. So I'll try to poke around in places I'm not supposed to be.
Providing the hidden stats carry over, of course.
I would be very upset if they don't.
I mean, we know augments don't or fixes don't carry over in PSO2S, so it's possible they may handle things in a similar way there.
They would have said it already, though, if fixes don't fully carry over.
So, initially people thought that Meseta wasn't going to carry over, but apparently Meseta is in New Genesis.
Yeah,
But looking back at the statement, all they said is that Meseta can't be used in the player shops, which makes me wonder if there's going to be a restriction where you can't use your Meseta in the player shops and you have to use a special new currency just in player trades.
It's possible. It might be a pseudo-premium currency for all we know.
Yep. It's very possible.
We're gonna have to use Gran.
As long as I can keep my HP, I am happy.
If the dolls are Machian, the new currency might be Gran.
I'm just hoping that the new currency is Meseta, but it's just italicized.
I mean, we've seen it show up in the drops in the video, so it's like Meseta and I don't know, Meseta 2 Electric Boogaloo. No, we'll have to see.
In the Japanese version of Phantasy Star Gaiden, the currency is just gold.
Yeah, that being the one on Copto, I think.
Hmm?
Yeah, that was Copto.
Yeah, so a lot that we've got to look forward to here. Yeah, I'm just looking forward to taking on the new bosses, seeing how they fight, seeing how things have really changed in the combat. Because I'm wondering how much damage you're going to reduce through parrying if they're going to have like ignition parry anymore for the hunter.
Does anyone else get the feeling that all we've seen are the mini bosses, and that this is just New Genesis's equivalent to like Gibbles in PSO?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, if we're looking at New Genesis actually playing more like a more traditional MMO, I'm looking forward to what they're going to be doing with bosses, if how many players they're going to restrict that to, and if you might actually need to set up like a static group to take them on.
Yeah, I think we might end up fighting against Maki and Gigantus and bigger.
Yeah. First thing we saw in PSO2 was Dark Ragnay, and that thing's a mini-boss, technically. So I have no doubts that we haven't seen an actual boss yet.
Yeah, and plus something we have to consider is, you know, the people that are the producers between Final Fantasy XIV, PSO2, and Monster Hunter. They know each other, and they go out quite often, so I would not be surprised if we start to see those kind of influences on PSO2 as well in New Genesis.
I really hope the actual bosses are like 32 players, like the open fields are showing. That would be awesome.
They are stress testing PSO2 with more enemies, so anything's possible.
Well, I think that might have been more memory limitations being lifted because Vita's no longer being serviced.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, any other predictions, comments, anything from YouTube?
No, I think I'm good.
I think we've thoroughly covered everything.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm pretty much tapped as well here on ideas, but it's we definitely went through a lot to really sum up everything for PSO2 and what we're going to be seeing here in the future. Definitely, I want to thank the two of you for coming on the show here today. EarningKey, Arawen, do either of you have a place where people can connect with you at all?
No, not me particularly. People see me around ship 2. They can say hi.
I'm in PrinceBrightstar's Discord. That's probably the best way to contact me.
All right. Well, once again, let me thank you both for coming on the show here today. We had a great discussion here. Definitely went longer than our typical show here. I'm hoping that that in the future, and I'll extend this invitation to you both now here, that if once New Genesis comes out, maybe we could do another show like this for commentary in terms of where we're thinking the story is going and such like that.
Of course, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
All right. Cool. And so with that, that brings us to the end of this special episode 6 ending analysis episode. On behalf of EarningKey, Arawen, and myself, thank you very much for joining us today. Day has dawned. Have a great day, everyone.